Hello and welcome to Conversations with the Voice of Reason. I'm your host, Benjamin Boyce, and today's conversants are Julie Jaman and Amy Sousa, who are both Port Townsend residents, which is in Washington State. At the end of July of 2022, Julie was taking a post-swim shower at the local YMCA when she heard behind the curtain, or on the other side of the curtain, a male voice, and she peeked her head out and saw a male assisting 10-year-old girls with their bathing suits. There was a confrontation, and then Julie was ejected from the premises for being discriminatory against this male's apparent trans identity. There then developed something of a series of events in Port Townsend, and Amy and Julie in this conversation discuss what happened thereafter. Very interesting story having to do with gender encoded in law and the current mores in the United States of America, especially around gender or transgender, and especially in the state of Washington. I hope you enjoy this. In the description are links so that you can help Julie and Amy as they raise awareness and foment some sort of lawfare. Without further ado, here is Julie and Amy. How's your summer? Now done.
Yeah, it's been pretty good. It got a little spicy in the end, but it's been nice.
You like the spice though, don't you?
Yeah.
You're a salsa kind of girl, right?
Yeah, I thought that I'd been to a lot of spicy protests until I went to the one in my tiny town of 10,000.
You think it's indicative of Washington?
Yeah, I think that it definitely... I think that well, what's funny is because I told people who were coming, I was like, I think we're going to get some Antifa coming over from Seattle. But in terms of like my townspeople, like I know these people, I know their names, I know their faces, I can talk to them. I can, literally just say, like so-and-so, like let's calm down. My townspeople were the absolute worst of the bunch. They were far worse than the Seattle transplants. They did the majority of the violence. There were women who were former friends of mine who were just like calling me a cunt the whole time, flipping me off the whole time. I was in shock. I was pretty shocked. I thought that I have seen a lot of ridiculous TRA protesters, but it's also been really interesting because of course they always tell on themselves by their behavior, and they're one of their biggest shouting things was no hate here, as they like knock down elderly women. Like the disconnect was just ridiculous.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then of course,
how old's the kid that he's a kid, right? Is he 18, 19? Is he still a minor?
I think he's 19. Okay. But he did just graduate. So he just graduated from high school, and he's been doing quite well for himself.
Oh yeah, I bet.
Because he has a GoFundMe that's raised
set of boobs right now, orchiectomy, it's all covered.
Yeah, I think he's raised like $17,000 or something like this.
Nice.
Yeah.
I would never stoop to calling anybody a grifter, but that's some primo return on his investment.
Oh, it's gone up. He's collected almost $20,000.
Nice. Okay.
Yeah.
And Julie, I muted you, but you're rolling in the dough too, right? You must have been making bank here, right? You probably have like Fortune 500 company.
It's actually wampum is what I'm rich in. It's 170 feet below me on the seashore. It's in the form of seashells.
Oh, okay.
That's all I have.
But and up ravens. In your area of the woods, that's the primo currency, right? That's how you trade for wheat and milk.
Yeah, it's tradable. Yeah, I'm pretty sure. I have cedar also. Cedar bark for basket makers. Whatever.
Oh, okay, great.
2 cats in a yard. That's it.
We were just talking about the odd makeup of the protest. Amy was saying that she thought that it would be Antifa from Seattle that would come up and do counter-protesting for you guys. And we should tell the story, but Amy was saying that it was mostly local people who were acting most extreme against your guys' message.
I know that in my conversation with the police chief, Olson, he seemed to think also he recognized lots of local people as in the assault task force there. However, to my way of observing that, it seemed to me there was a great deal of choreography going on. And my opinion of that is that there was a lot of practice. There were a few people standing back, and they were very expert at directing and controlling what was going on there. Mm-hmm. I don't think those were local people. I think there was a lot of something else involved.
Mm-hmm. It's, I mean, it's done in such a way that it's impossible to tell, but I could suppose that since there have been so many protests in our neck of the woods since the election of Trump the first time in 2016, it's kind of just a protest community, and they do so many events that they all kind of are already on the same page for any given thing that they need to go out and execute, whatever they call it.
Practice. They've had good practice.
Yeah, they've had a lot of good practice. But let's tell your story, Julie. And thank you, Amy, for setting this up. This was kind of a big deal for our neck of the woods. This is up in Pacific Northwest at the, I guess, the northwest tip of Washington where you guys are. So what happened to cause you to be such the cause celebre?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was always my plan at 80 to become a starlet, so I just settled in. So it's true. We live in the most westward part of the United States, northwestern part. We're on the Olympic Peninsula. This little town is about 10,000 people, but it calls itself a city. And we have a little swimming pool that we've had for about 60 years. It belongs to the school district. It's leased to the city, and the city has a contract with the YMCA to manage it. And I swim in it. I've swum in it for many, many years. And it was, of course, built like a school gym. And it has a dressing shower room for women, and it has a dressing shower room for men. And then you go into the pool and come out of the pool. And that's what I was doing in the place, as I've always done it, and showering. But I heard a man's voice. And we have sort of little shower curtains hanging down between there's about maybe 8 or 10 shower heads, but they flutter, and so they're, if you want to see something you can, but women are very nice to each other that way. So nevertheless, I heard a man's voice, and I looked over by where there are 2 bathroom stalls with doors on them, and I saw a man in a woman's bathing suit watching little girls take down their swimsuits so they could use the toilet. And I was immediately on my instincts, and I looked at him and I said, let's see, remembering all this story still, I said, Mom, do you have a penis? Is what I said. And he said, that is none of your business. And I said, you need to get out of here right now. And from the other side, where there's a small room for the staff, a locker room with a door, out came a person in a red t-shirt, staff person, turned to her, and I said, get him out of here. And she said, without a pause, you're discriminating, you're out of here for the rest of your life, and I'm calling the cops. That's the way it went down. I was just knocked back. Could not believe it.
How old were the girls that this person was overseeing?
I'd say they were
approximately
probably.
Sorry, could you?
10.
Under 10. Okay.
Yeah, I would say, I'm guessing.
Yeah. And in your experience, have women gone in and helped girls to do that and overseen girls using the bathroom?
Sure. There's always been programs for kids. There's all kinds of programs for the old ladies and for the swim team and for the kids. And so, I suppose there has been some sort of supervision. I don't think in the past the management was by the city. I don't recall there being any kind of requirement that little kids couldn't manage to use the toilets without the adults being there. But it was also very casual. The women are in and out of the dressing room all the time. So we're always kind of mixing it up.
Yeah.
Under the Y has they apparently have some very rigid standards because it is clear to me the Y understands that there's a great potential for something untoward to happen to little kids in a locker room. Shall I say now, given the 2015 Human Rights Commission rules, they are even more aware of it. So when you go to the pool the first time as a patron or member, they want a photo ID and they check you through some program to see if you have been convicted of any kind of sexual crime. And then they have rules about how many people have to be together to go to the bathroom and so on. It's clear that they understand that they are liable for something. And so they have taken big steps.
Mm-hmm. I could understand a preschool age group, especially girls needing assistance with bathing suits. Those things are kind of snug and you have to do a bunch of wiggling and stuff. But 8, 9, 10-year-olds doesn't seem proper. Like they could probably handle themselves. They have a sense of balance. I worked in preschool, so I understand how the physics work. But like a 8, 9, 10-year-old needing assistance and direct oversight just seems a little out of it. Like, I don't think that anybody would really want to be doing that unless they wanted to be doing that. But I don't know.
Well, it is in their policies. It's written very clearly. There will be, they call it fees and so on and so forth. And obviously now we know they are doing this because there's a huge liability issue running around here when you start mixing up men and women in the same space and little kids. Unbeknownst to us, there was no signage when you enter this dressing shower room, which is all one room. There's no signage, or at least on July 26th, there wasn't, that I could expect a man to be in there or a man who thinks he's a woman to be in there.
Okay. So to protect, so I guess there's a tension here. There's this ethic of inclusion and non-discrimination, and then there's safeguarding for liability. I wonder when they do the calculus of who they're going to be more liable to, they've made the choice that they're more liable to respect the wishes of transgender people than the protection of females at this point. At least that's how they acted toward you.
That is definitely the stance they've taken, and they reinforced it. Now, I understand by interpretations of the rules, the WACs here in Washington State, that I acted correctly. I saw something and I spoke up. That was the right thing to do. And in order to, this is just my speculations, I don't have proof yet, but it appears the woman staffer that was there acted so rashly. She did not, for a moment, question if I was all right, what had happened, or even offered, get dressed, come to my office, I'll explain the new rules. Nothing like that occurred. There was no interaction. There was just the condemnation. Well, in order for that to stick, this is my interpretation, I subsequently heard from the director, the CEO of the Olympic Peninsula Y, Wendy Bart, that she had been told I used vulgar language and verbal abuse. and this was all, of course, news to me. But when you start throwing that sort of thing in the pot, then I become a culprit rather than either a helper or a victim. And it turns out now, over the last few weeks, those accusations, that list has grown and grown. It turns out that over the last year, I have done just awful things. I've touched patrons and staff. I've yelled and screamed and abused, and maybe Amy can remember. I mean, the litany just goes on. However, in all the requests for documentation about these accusations, none has been forthcoming. So it's only been spread by the media. And unfortunately, in this town, they have done a very good job. And those accusations are being repeated over and over. And so my starlet crown is a bit tarnished, I must say.
So retroactively, you've been written up. There's a bunch of documentation has been produced. Have you ever been spoken to by the staff at this Y that other people are uncomfortable about you, or have you ever been approached and spoken to by the staff before this incident?
No. In all my years, I have never been reprimanded, whistled, get out of the pool, warning, nothing. I know pool etiquette, and this is a sorry state of affairs. Is all I can say.
Okay.
Well, and I think just to correct you just a tiny bit, they actually have not been able to produce any documentation. So no,
or
still
they won't, we don't know. I mean, you ask for it. Are they busy creating something to fix their records? Do they actually have something, but their manager at the pool is so inept that she didn't know how to say to me, you're not supposed to do that over the last year? I don't know. There is a real failure of professional skills, I will say that, which is one of the things I asked for when I went to City Council. They really need some training because this issue is huge and delicate and a major shift in our culture. And the best they could do is what happened to me.
I would assume that they have been trained, but not on account of professional conduct so much as acceptance and inclusion of certain identities. I'm sure they've been thoroughly trained in that, especially in the last 5 years. But so let's walk through the story. So that event happens. You're thrust upon the curb. What happens after? Are you told to pack up your things and get out of town, or get out of the Y? I mean.
So I dressed, got into the foyer. The same staff person approached me. She told me that I was not in compliance, not following Y principles and values. I agreed with her. I do not follow an ideology, but I told her that I do have respect for human beings and that there are women that use this facility who have been assaulted or have been victims, and they need privacy and safety. That's just basic. And she just went on for a while about her personal story. That was not, I told her I needed to go to the police right now. And the police happened to be right next door to this building. So I started to leave, and this staff person, along with another staff person, started yelling at me that I couldn't leave, that the cops were coming. And I turned around, I said, I am going to the police station right now. I'm not waiting around. So I did. And I talked with the person there. There was no investigator there to talk with. I told her the story. She gave me cards and phone numbers, and I asked if I could go home, and she said yes. So I did. And I thought about what had happened. And I decided right then I was going to take action. And first, I called the Olympic YMCA and got a message for Wendy Bart. She eventually called me back. She told me that she assumed, that was her word, that pride signs that say welcome all, everyone, is enough for women to know what to expect. And that's what. There's no signage on the dressing room door. I don't know if parents are informed of what to expect under this new mixing it up. I don't know. But she, at that point, informed me of all the multiple accusations and disparagement and all the rest of it. And she stood by her staff, and that was that. So I made a sign. I planned on picketing up at the pool for 1 week, 2 hours each day. That's what I was going to do. I was going to inform people what was going on. My sign said, men who identify as women are using the women's dressing shower area. And I also created a petition asking the Y and the city to create a gender-free space so that women could have a private and safe space for themselves. And that's what I did. On August 1st, Monday, I stood up there from 11 to 1, and there were a few transgendered people around. We had exchanges, conversational exchanges, and I got educated at that point that I'm not saying it right. It's not that men who identify as women, it is men who say they are women are women. Now, I just can't even wrap myself around that particular part of what I think is either a cult or an ideology. Whatever it is, it's just counter to anything I understand. So later that day, some other hecklers came, and they were quite loud and quite unkind. And I stood there, got petitions, signatures, and at 1 o'clock I left. And the next day I came again, and a few supporters came with me, and there was quite a crowd up there. The pool area entrance had been decorated in banners. There were rainbow face masks, and it was as if a big celebration was going on in the pool. And I just didn't get it at the time. But there must have been maybe 30 or 40 transgender supporter types there. They were going in and out, coming out. They were loud and heckling, and it was not very nice. So I just tried to keep myself separated. I just wanted to let swimmers know. And the supporters that were with me did get into conversations, little pods of conversations with some people. And I heard back that what started out as sort of screaming and yelling and not listening often turned into conversations that had listening going on. And that was pretty interesting. I can't say anything came of that, but at least there was that possibility, and there were people there supporting me who had the courage to engage that way, and that was very impressive. So, and I think it began to come very clear that we were there in support of women, female humans. That is really what this came to be all about, and so that went on for another hour or so, and at 1 o'clock again I left. Then I made a decision I wasn't going to go back anymore. I should back up. On Monday, the first day I picketed, that evening was city council meeting, and I went to that meeting, and I made 3 minutes of comment is what you're allowed, and I requested of city council that they get professional training for all the staff, that they create a gender-free space. And Amy, help me, I can't remember what my third request was.
Well, you wanted adequate signage as well.
Oh, and signage, absolutely. And for parents to be informed. So we needed written information. We needed transparency about this whole big change, this big cultural change. Good signage and so on. Now, remember, we're a very small town, so 1/2 of 1% is a handful of people that may have a sympathy to transgender or even maybe experiencing transgender changes. I don't know, but it's very small. So those were the things that I asked of council. And it was just amazing. It was my first coming out as starlet. I turned around from the podium and the whole room erupted into applause. It was so surprising. I had no idea. And of course, the mayor Faber was hammering and, we got to keep order here. Well, comments went on for about an hour, I would say. Both sides, more than both sides, being represented both in person and by Zoom. But what was very clear was this is a huge issue. Council hadn't seen action like that in years. I mean, it was major. So by the end of that council meeting, I gather, because I left, I didn't stay for the whole meeting. But by the end of that meeting, not one counselor suggested even that maybe they should form an advisory committee, maybe they should have some community meetings. This is very serious. We want the community to be involved. Nothing, absolutely nothing. And Mayor Faber lectured at the end of this of how abominable people had acted and how transgender people need to be respected. And he probably went on for that, on homophobia and who knows what all. And then the city manager did the same thing, lecturing how intolerable it was. And he's much more slick with his PR than anybody else in the room. So you'd have to listen to see how he put it out there. But there was no doubt that I was an interloper and that the people that were supporting me were not acceptable in their opinions and views. And we needed to be welcoming to transgender people. And so I can go on from there to August 10th, but maybe you want some fill in from between then and then, or shall I continue?
Well, it's just fascinating. Side note question. This was all broadcast, I assume, this council meeting?
Yes, it's on audio and video. You can watch it.
And so far as you know, there was no attempt to compromise, to find a way to ameliorate both sides, so-called, of this issue, to say, okay, we can respect transgenderism and we can also safeguard women. Was there any motion in that direction?
Well, I would expect in the comments by people for an hour, you surely could probably find people who were trying to find that place of let's be human together, let's respect each other, and so on, but not on the part of the council.
Okay, so the council, the mayor, and that second person, are they both male?
Yes, city manager John Morrow, okay, and David Faber, and I am sure that Amy can fill you in on some of that.
Oh, so Amy, you've done some digging, I assume, into to fill out the background of this, or have you seen? One other question, I don't know if you guys know, have there been any incidents at that Y with regard to sexual assault or anything like that you're aware of? Is there a history of that?
Not that I'm aware of.
Okay, so it's a pretty chill town. You guys don't have terribly a lot of crime.
We're a very sweet little Victorian seaport, and we have tea and bagels, and we want you to visit. Okay.
All right. Apparently you do have a lot of tea. So Amy, did you have
We have a lot of beer too. Good beer.
Amy, did you have anything to add to this before we skip to the 10th, or do you know how the media, it extended from the town to the media a little bit?
Well, I think probably this is around, Julie had contacted me right before, I think you contacted me right after the events went down on July 26th. I was out of town for the first city council meeting on the 1st, but we had begun planning already about our event on the 15th, so I don't know if Julie was going to go into this, but right after that city council meeting on the 1st, where, there was a very clear public support of what Julie was saying and her position, as can be seen from the applause and the applause of other people who were taking Julie's side. And Mayor Faber then, I think it was the next day or the day after that, introduced to the town a transgender proclamation with a series of whereas, that's like, whereas Washington state law protects the rights of transgender people, whereas, transgender people are more likely to face suicidality, whereas they're more likely to face crime and homelessness and all these whereases, ending with,
Don't tell, Amy, don't tell until we get to the end of the 15th.
Oh, okay. Okay.
Well, the end of the 15th. Wait, the end of the 15th, but the 15th but the organizing around the 15th specifically has to do with the creation of the proclamation and what went down.
Well, it took August 10th. Yeah. What came, because the punctuation point is $2,000.
Okay.
On August 10th.
I'll defer.
Julie studied her Wagner. She knows all about dramatic timing here.
Okay.
That's right. So on August 10th, there's a public workshop with the culture committee, which means 2 council people, 3 maybe, and whoever wants to be sitting there. City Manager Morrow made sure that all but 1 of our 10 policemen were there, ostensibly because there had been threats. And Morrow felt that he needed this security. It turns out also in this week, the 10th, I think, was a Wednesday. So that entire week, the pool had been closed by the Y, also ostensibly because of threats to the staff. So the Y has had a little bit of trouble keeping this pool open because they're short on staff. Who knows what that's all about. So here comes this meeting in the afternoon. And during this meeting, Manager Morrow tells the 9 people that are there all about what he has either heard or seen about all the accusations against me, confirms that they exist, and goes on to describe that the staff at the pool had done everything they could to calm the situation down right when this incident occurred. To no avail, he says, to no avail. And that's why the cops were called. So here is this city manager in an incredibly mendacious description of the same stuff that we can't get any documentation to. And he's putting that out in the public. And there is where they reviewed the proclamation language, I believe, and then it came forward to the August 15th City Council meeting, the infamous August 15th. Go, Amy.
Okay. I see.
Wait, hold on. I just want to make clear for the record that according to the city council, you are such a dangerous person that they need 9 police officers surrounding them when they proclaim how dangerous you are specifically. You're such a threat to their way of life.
I don't know what the threats were about, but that's what was at that August 10th meeting. And on August 15th, you will hear the uniformed police were all around City Hall for ostensibly the same reasons.
Okay. Because you and your whole group are a threat to the way of this town. You guys...
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Right. And you've
So
lived in this town for a while, just to be clear.
About 40 years.
Okay. All right. Okay.
So the town had announced they announced the proclamation before the 10th, because the 10th was when they were going to hone in on language and go over if they thought any language in it was a problem. So this had been announced before the 10th. I started posting about this on my social media, so it was already creating some interest and curiosity. And of course, my followers were taking this and running with it. And I simply at first questioned, what is this proclamation? Why is it? Because the language in it really says that the city of Port Townsend values our transgender residents and visitors and urges all residents and visitors to be respectful, welcoming, and kind to everyone, regardless of gender identity. I further proclaim that discrimination and prejudice in any form, especially against transgender people, is unwelcome and has no place in the city of Port Townsend. So I really questioned what this means. Mm-hmm. And I was simply tweeting on my own page, not in reference to, I didn't call anyone out specifically. Our mayor, David Faber, decided to respond to me with a quote tweet saying, "Zippity boop." So my question had been, what is this meant to mean? What's the deeper implication of this? His response to me was zippity boop. So I then, asked him our age-old Helen Stanlin question of, do you think women and girls deserve boundaries around our bodies? He did not respond to this. That was pretty much his only response to me. But of course, I could see in this response obviously it's a very childish response. It's very juvenile, and mostly it's not respectful of the legitimate concerns that women have around our bodies and around our boundaries. In that meeting on the 10th, when they were honing in on language, it was very interesting because Faber decided that to say that they don't allow discrimination, especially against transgender people, he thought that was maybe a little too much. So they changed it in the end to Port Townsend doesn't discriminate particularly against transgender people. So especially was changed to particularly. So now it's very softened. It's softened the whole thing out.
I don't know. Is that softened? Because that means we'll particularly discriminate against women, but not particularly. That's just
not particularly. So, and my overarching question to him was, I can be all of those things. I can be respectful, I can be welcoming, and I can be kind to anyone who claims a specific gender identity claim. I can be all of those things. But that doesn't mean I don't also want to have boundaries around my body based on my sex. I'm not asking for sex-based provisions and rights based on anyone's identity. So I'm not saying I don't want men in my spaces because of their identity claims. I'm saying I don't want men in my spaces because of their sex. And this is a sex-based boundary. And so this is really why I wanted to gather people together before the event on the 15th, before the city council meeting on the 15th. I decided to call a press conference event where women would speak. I myself wanted to speak. I invited Julie to speak. There were, besides the two of us, there were 9 other speakers, one man, and there were 10 women and 1 man who spoke on that day. And there were a number of things that I organized around because I have done some events similar to this. So I was very particular to, one, contact the chief of police, Tom Olson, and apprise him of my event, to tell him that I had done other events like this and some things that I thought that we could expect. I told him there would be a number of elderly women and some elderly men in the group, and that I was concerned for their safety. I was very clear with him that my whole purview of my group was to, hold a live stream and press conference to focus on ourselves. I said, I don't want to interact with any protesters of my event. I want to focus on ourselves. I want to be a good audience for the speakers who are coming. I want us to be able to listen to one another. My point is not to engage with anyone else. And also all of my messaging will be in the positive. So all of my messaging will be for women, for safeguarding, and for sex-based rights, because I wanted to hone in on the fact that this is an issue of sexism. This is about sex-based rights and provisions, and sexism is a thing that has fallen out of public and political consciousness. So we're sort of losing the meaning behind that term. And part of my speaking before the council meeting that was going to present this transgender proclamation was to say that women and girls also have needs. And we used to have political language and consciousness around these needs, around the needs of our bodies and around the needs of our sex. So I talked with the police multiple times. I had another police liaison who was also a go-between and spoke to the police multiple times. So there were many conversations that we had leading up to this event. And it was before the event, I will also say that, I didn't engage with Faber online, but he started posting online that quote unquote TERFs were coming to his town. That he was afraid that he would be assassinated by a TERF.
All right, you guys are killer tweeters. I've been dogpiled. You guys have some claws. You guys have some shirt. I've never felt fear of assassination. I've made some pretty bad jokes on Twitter that have ticked off a contingent, but I don't know. Maybe this guy's a very sensitive fellow, apparently.
Yeah. So he was also, he is friends online with different people who call themselves Antifa. So they were having back and forths about this event in his, on his profile page. I forwarded these to the police so they could be apprised that there was a protest being planned against us by potential members of Antifa. Again, this is on the mayor's Facebook page. And the point here of mentioning this is because he was incredibly inflammatory. So he was really emboldening the community and the wider community to really act against us. He was this whole messaging. The whole attempt of the town is to create messaging that Julie is some kind of bully. Now you look at her. She's white-haired, rosy-cheeked. She looks like a Mrs. Claus type figure. You really have to work double time to create a villain out of an 80-year-old woman who stood up in protection of little girls. You have to do a lot of manufacturing of narrative to create and promote this story. But the story really only picked up in my tiny town. I think the Port Townsend Leader has a readership of 5 or 6,000. So the fact of the matter is my Twitter following is 3 times the size of the press in my small town. So the wider culture and community is looking at this story, and they can see it for what it is. And ultimately, when we came to do that event, Julie and a number of her friends were there. We had elderly members of the community who came out. I had some friends from Tacoma, Sovereign Women, the Sovereign Women group came out from Tacoma. There were elderly members who introduced themselves who came over from Whidbey Island because they were concerned of this same thing happening in their town. I did have 2 friends who came out for the event. Jennifer Thomas and Gabrielle Clark came to support me for the event. And then there were other concerned members from town. I had a couple of parents introduce themselves to me as supporters when we arrived. Now, I specifically also planned this event on the day of the city council meeting in order that we could all go over to city council and speak our concerns about this proclamation and about what had happened to Julie, and to speak about safeguarding. And I wanted to be able to have our voice heard in council as well. Now, unfortunately, when we arrived for our event, which I planned for an hour before the meeting because I knew what time the doors of city council were going to open, there was already a line around the corner of people lined up to go to this council meeting. So even before my event, I spoke to the police and said, are we going to have an opportunity to have our due process as well? Is there going to be a way to equitably have both sides' voices heard? The police pretty much told me, nope, it's first come, first serve, and you're probably not going to get in because the fire code says only 75 people are getting in. So if you're not in line already, you're probably not getting in. So that was, first of all, very disappointing to hear.
That's at like about 5 o'clock. The city council meeting doesn't start till 6:30. So easily before, 2 hours before. Big deal. It's the roadie parade.
So beats the roadie parade, which you don't know. So we began our event. We began with a song, which was very lovely. We started in song just to start us off in a grounded way, and we moved on to our speeches. And pretty much as soon as I started speaking, we were about 35. The larger crowd we are guessing is somewhere around 350 to 400 people. It's hard to say. You can see from the pictures and the video footage that the crowd was pretty much a city block deep. I had requested to be against a building. So we did have a brick wall at our backs. And we had, when we started, probably around 30 feet of space around us and our group. Almost immediately, by the time I finished speaking and handed the mic to Julie, the crowd had already pressed us into maybe around 5 feet of space around our microphone and amp. Our press conference lasted for about an hour, and for an hour, we were linking arms. That was a strategy that we had come up with to keep ourselves protected. They were trying to break through our arms. There was a man that we ended up naming the Worm, who literally crawled on the floor, forced himself between our legs, attempted, he he unplugged
Disconnected
our amp, unconnected our amp. He stole phones that we eventually got back. He stole our suffragette flags. There was another man who we called the dwarf. He was also, these were both men from town. He was also infiltrating our group, getting in our faces. These men were knocking women over. One of them held Jennifer Thomas down while he both tried to grab her phone and successfully pried off. He held her leg between his thighs and pried off her shoe. This was very disturbing behavior. From about maybe 10 minutes in, we have records of people calling 911 because as this went down, the police were across the street. We could see them across the street watching. Now, I was very shocked at this because I had multiple conversations, as I said, with Chief Olson about safety and he had assured me that his primary concern was protecting people and protecting property. And we had multiple emails and conversations about this. Now you can see we requested in the end FOI footage. So we have body cam footage from the police officers. And in this footage, you can see women going up and saying to the officers, old ladies are being knocked to the ground. What are you going to do? Where are you? What are you doing over here on the other side of the street? And the officer says on camera, if you feel unsafe, you should go home.
So let me fill in a couple pieces here. I was at the microphone when the really ear-splitting cacophony and kettling really started in, and big time. It was quite unlike any experience I'd had at any demonstration. The kind of heckling, whistling, screaming, and of course, I believe that there were provocateurs there. They were really looking to be in a fight. While I was at the microphone, this started, I asked on the microphone, please somebody get the police. People went across the street, as Amy said, and the police chief said to them that they were following a directive. And that's why they were standing there. Now, a directive in my world is something that comes down. And the only way I can see that is that their boss, the city manager, had sent a directive to the chief of police. What the purpose of this is, I can't quite figure out, but they simply stood and watched for most of this until the highway patrol showed up. Somebody finally called 911. The 911 operator said, well, call the police in. And he said, they're already here. So the highway patrol and the sheriff came, and that's when there was intervention. But before that happened, at least 3 times, groups of bicyclists, maybe 10 or more, rode right through the middle of our group, knocking into people. It was extremely unsafe. Later, when I spoke with Chief Olson about this, he said, well, I could see that there was a passageway for the bikes to pass through. When asked why he didn't stop this. And I admonished him. I said, in Port Townsend, you would never let bicyclists ride on the sidewalk, ever. And just let me put this little aside in. We have a weekly newspaper, and it is not friendly toward me or any of the parts of this story other than pro-transgender, as far as I can tell. Now, this ear-splitting cacophony, as Amy said, hundreds of people were doing this. In the weekly leader, there is a police log. And in that log of that week, there were, I believe, at least 3 reports of noise problems. And that included a man playing a guitar and swearing, and a couple having an argument. And the police responded to that. but not to this hundreds of people doing this thing. So there's definitely some kind of directive, some kind of, dare I say, agenda. I don't know, but it looks that way.
And I know it's a little reductive to say this. That said, these people are all fighting for the right of a young man to look at 10-year-old girls undress. Like that's the material reality. They're all assaulting you and up in arms from the top down and from the bottom up to allow a young man to watch little girls undress.
Or that I spoke up. I'm not sophisticated about all this. I was just a swimmer, and I spoke up about what I saw. Not this guy had no identification. They keep saying this employee, this trans employee, and stuff like that. Well, and they say bathroom or dressing room. It wasn't. It was a shower room. I was naked in a shower, and this guy was in a woman's suit watching little kids. That's what I saw, and I spoke. Okay. And it's converted into this big, oh dear.
Were you, Julie, were you at all aware of this this kind of cultural shift before the 26th of July?
I am. I keep at a political, I'm fairly well read politically at the national and international level. I certainly knew about this issue. I'm very, very strongly pro women and children, and that's obviously my orientation. So yeah, I know that this verbiage, these definitions were beginning to come along, but it took this incident before I ever realized that it was the Washington State Human Rights Commission that offered up the wordage that essentially erases sex as an identity and recognizes only gender preference identities. So in the big picture, it became very clear, not just from reading media, but my own experience, that women, by sex identity, female humans, are no longer being recognized. The word is we're being erased. And it is very clear now. With all the agencies involved in this, they're all lined up. It is very clear on their forms and on their failure to respond to me and all the stuff we know from parents in the school system. Women appear not to be necessary much longer. That's what I sense.
So the 15th, you guys get out relatively unscathed. I want to know what happened to that shoe and why that guy needed that shoe. Like that's a very specific thing to go after.
The shoe was uncovered. The shoe was recovered, rather. And I think that, sorry, I'm trying to re-put in my phone. The shoe was recovered. I think that the taking of the shoe was to distract and deflect so that he could, again, unplug our speaker. So that was all in an attempt, an elaborate attempt to dismantle our sound, because Jennifer was standing near the sound system trying to protect it.
Well, so I just don't want these. I don't want these counter protesters to come across that we're making them look bad by assuming that they have a shoe fetish or anything. It was probably some sort of strategy to get something else. It wasn't necessarily.
Yeah, I mean, they did a really good job of telling on themselves. You know, one of their main chants was no hate here. So they're screaming at us, no hate here, as they knock us around, as they have surrounded a group of like 35 of us and backed up against the wall with hundreds of them just closing in on us, screaming no hate. You know, that there was a big cognitive dissonance. And I think that's where my town is a little shocked, because they told a story on themselves. I don't really have to say much about them because the images and the video from the event tell the story. They speak for itself. You can see who are the bullies and who are not the bullies. As Julie said, the leader, the Port Townsend leader, is trying to tell a story that there was a mob of heroes that successfully shut down a group of elderly bullies and rape victims. I mean, of course they're calling us an anti-trans group, but their whole story is one of success. And the larger media, this gained international attention. We have a lot of press there. This eventually went into legacy media. Julie spoke on Tucker Carlson, and the larger media is telling events as they were. So I think my town is very surprised at how they are being received in the wider news, because ultimately they were a group of anti-free speech zealots who were trying to shut down the free assembly of elderly women, rape survivors, and women who wanted to talk about sex-based protections. And it was after about a week of this media storm that finally Mayor Faber went onto his Twitter and finally said, I don't support the violence that happened to women. I don't stand with violence. Before the event, he was afraid that he was going to get assassinated by a turf and inflaming and emboldening this behavior. All of a sudden now, a week later, prior to news stories coming out, he doesn't agree with violence against women.
So this is how it is portrayed in the leader, actually, that both groups, they make it this polarized thing. Both groups were screaming and yelling, and the police chief says, we were just letting them have their free speech, and like that. They were just making it out as if we were all equally engaged in this assault back and forth. And so, it's rather... Olson literally said, about us, he said, well, that's kind of what happens when you wander into a mosh pit. A mosh pit.
You're gonna get knocked around if you wander into a mosh pit. We had a permit for our event.
Police chief, the police chief that you've spoken to. Okay.
This was a permit.
Blame the victim. Okay.
They, as Amy has described, they had plenty of time. We were escorted by a phalanx of police uniformed people to get out of there. Finally. And on my way out, there was Chief Olson, and I told him I needed to speak with him. And he said, I'll be in my office tomorrow. Come at 8:00. And I had to remind him his doors don't open until 10. And I was there at 10 the next day. But I was told Chief Olson had taken 2 days off. So there I am again. Not able to speak with him. He did call me a couple of hours later. We talked about the bikes going through. And what became clear in all of this in part was here we were down there in the park across from City Hall. The city council meeting has begun. And down below, there are a few hundred people attacking these old ladies, trans people and supporters. And upstairs, the council is passing the proclamation to be particularly or especially particularly kind and welcoming to trans people. While this cacophony of attack is going on downstairs. Talk about dissonance. I mean, it was so Kafkaesque or something. I'm sure I'm in the right profession as a starlet now. It's just unbelievable.
Well, didn't the stranger side with the side against you folks? I saw Katie Herzog, who's pretty close to where you guys are at, was mocking them because of their coverage of the event.
Yeah,
guys in a bad light.
yeah. Katie and Jesse spoke about it. Yeah, the stranger framed it as, you know, the town showed up and they shut down the evil turfs, and they literally said turfs are not safe in Port Townsend. So that was the language that the stranger used. That, I mean, women, who are turfs? Women are not safe in Port Townsend. And the town again has now doubled down on this, where Faber, as well as Libby Wenstrom, who is a city councilor, have put up a turfs out of Port Townsend sign with this big wave, this big pink wave, chasing a woman figure as she runs away from it. So very much saying that women who want to speak out about our uniquely sexed bodies are not welcome in Port Townsend.
And they posted that on their social or on their office?
On their social media.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. But you said that Faber's kind of retracted a little bit and backed off a little bit, or not?
He's confused about his own position, I think, because he's both backed off but also doubled down. You know, I don't know that he gets what it is to be a politician, maybe so much, because he did come back and say, you know, I don't condone violence. But on the other hand, he's put up a lot more of this kind of inflammatory messaging and calling women turfs. And a really interesting thing has happened here, too, because there is a group that came to our town led by this guy, Robert Zerfing, who's called the Common Sense Conservative. He's got a YouTube following of about 100K. He put on an event here this last week on the 3rd. I chose not to be a part of it because of some personal communications between us that I was not comfortable with. But still, this group led by him of men who may and may not be Proud Boys, I don't know, but came to our town. And in response to this group coming, the police chief put up a giant metal fence around the park. They put up another metal fence about 15 feet away. They kept the groups entirely separated from one another. So for some reason, when the mayor fears that he's going to be assassinated by a woman, the groups are allowed to clash and be on top of each other. When it's a group of men who want to come and have a free speech event, they are completely protected and separated, and it's held very differently.
Well, just to be slightly cynical about this, if they know that you guys won't actually be violent and that the ruffian, you'll get roughed up. I guess they're not really concerned about you guys getting roughed up, but they know that you're not really actually dangerous. They probably know that these common sense conservatives come packing and that it could lead to actual violence, murder, and that's something they don't want to deal with. So they're fine with you guys getting bruised, but they don't want to deal with the paperwork when it comes to some gunfire in town square.
I mean, I think you're pretty right on there.
Yeah.
But it was just very interesting to see how the two different events were handled, and being right back to back. It was just visually, again, the town keeps telling on itself. They keep telling on themselves.
Back to the 15th, one of the stories that came to me from a policeman to me later on was that there was a group to one side amongst the hundreds dressed in black. They were putting on black masks, face masks. And this policeman told me that he could see weapons. He could see a type of club, mace, and possibly outlines of guns and pockets. So they knew there was pretty dangerous potential while they stood across the street and did nothing. Let's see if there was the sense in this town of some sort of agenda. Again, I can't suss it out, but for this September 3rd event that occurred, I was told businesses downtown were told to be careful, to watch out, to prepare for disruption or chaos. Water Street was closed down at certain places. Police and what troopers, I don't know, came in. I've heard 20 to 40, I don't know, from elsewhere. I mean, this town was set up for some sort of an event on September 3rd, unlike anything that I have ever heard about, ever.
This is the conscious or common sense conservative movement or demonstration?
To protect, And at one interview, Amy and I were at one interview with a young woman who just did a tremendous, my version of a plein air interview. She was up at the Y building. And while we were being interviewed, an older woman came along and she really laid into me while the microphone and video was running and accusing me, of course, of all kinds of things. And then she revealed one thing. She said, you've just made a ruckus, Julie. And by making a ruckus, you could get the pool closed down. So her concern was probably reflecting something somewhere in the community about patrons of the pool that use it for exercise. Just be quiet. Just mind your own business.
Well, and the other thing she repeated to you is that you are making the town look bad because you're bringing negative press onto the town. So she was very cognizant of how the town is looking in the eyes of the world. The other ironic thing about her, it was a great interview. It was by Katie Davis-Ford of Rebel News. But the other interesting thing about this woman who started screaming at us is the whole time she kept saying, he has every right to be there. He's an employee. He was just doing his job. So she had no cognitive dissonance when it came to his actual sex. She knows his sex, and she kept repeating it, even though she was trying to be, on brand. Mm-hmm. She wasn't getting it mixed up in her head, and she was accurately sexing this young man.
So in the fairy tale or the parable, The Emperor Has No Clothes, once the child speaks out and says that the emperor's naked, everybody else sees that. This is the opposite. So we do say that the emperor has no clothes. We bring that up, but this is the opposite because, Julie, you are that boy. You're calling out that the emperor's naked and everybody's telling you to shut your trap, to be quiet, to go along, to not disrupt, to just enjoy the parade.
Yes. That essentially is the message, and it's what's really stunning is how well it is reinforced. I went to the Dove House after this happened. The Dove House is something that took years and years of volunteer effort to build as a shelter for women and children who have been domestically abused. It now is used for all victims, and their form now says gender identity, not sex identity. My curiosity was, how did they handle it if some sort of transgender person came? How do they keep women and children safe? I have made several calls, and I went there at least twice. Nobody is answering. Nobody is giving me any information. And it seems to be the same at the hospital, how they're designating women's services particularly. It's all getting neutralized into this gender space, and we're not talking, and you're not welcome. Now, I want to say, just to make sure, I want you to know that people from all over the United States have called me, they have written to me, and they have supported me. And it is stunning how far the reach has gone from all kinds of places. I mean, this thing spans from the most progressive feminist position to the most extreme Christian position. That whole continuum I have supporters on that continuum, and I'm just sending out a great big gratitude to everybody.
So going forward, what do you guys? Well, I don't want you to reveal your next moves, all your shifty turfing that you're doing up in Port Townsend. But what do you expect to happen? What's the push that you guys are going forward? Do you see any change on the political landscape or what? Because again, this does come from the top, and this comes from Inslee's regime. The Human Rights Commission. This is encoded in law, so you're fighting a huge uphill battle here.
I think that there's a unique opportunity here because I do think Julie's story is so personal. And I think that that story, as Julie said, is one of instincts. Any woman can relate to being naked in the shower and all of a sudden hearing a man's voice. The instinctual reaction that you have is an embodied response. It's precognitive. Before I think about why is this person in my space, I've already my body has already responded to the fact that a man is in my space. And I think that it's also a really captivating story in terms of the wider press and the wider, sort of global community, because one, Julie I don't think we've taken into account an elderly demographic in all of our messaging around this story. And I think that the Y is a really unique organization to go after because it does typically serve middle to low income families. It's a place where you go if you don't have a country club membership. It's a place where you go if you don't have a huge Equinox gym membership. This is a place where you go when you need after school care, when you need to send your kid to summer camp and you can't, send them to Lake Tahoe on a, river rafting, excursion vacation. This is where you go to do arts and crafts. You do gym. There's pools. And I think that, while the Y is a highly financed organization, the members that it serves are in a demographic who maybe have not yet been awakened to these policies. Julie and I went on Graham Linehan with Kaylee Traylor Harms, who has been a YMCA whistleblower. So she worked for the YMCA back in 2016 when they were creating this policy. She actually was asked to write the policy. She refused. And then they put this policy forward. They didn't publicly announce the policy. They just created the policy, started enacting it with no public communication. And she told stories of her being, she left, well, first of all, she was fired, but she was also whistleblowing about a man who was getting naked in the woman's YMCA room at I believe it's the Gig Harbor YMCA where she specifically was focused. So we know that there are problems, although this problem hadn't yet happened in Port Townsend. We know that this is an existing problem. And right now I am in the process of doing research, a lot of research about a lot of YMCAs all over the country to find out what has been happening. And I think I am in the process of creating an awareness campaign specifically about the YMCA. Also, we are going to do more events here in Port Townsend because the light is shining here right now.
Mm-hmm. And that's in no small part due to the Port Townsend Free Press that has done multiple articles, including Jim Scarantino revealed dozens of infractions like this in Ys all over the United States. Involving sexual crimes. There's a whole string of this going on. And a person up in Port Angeles at the other end of this peninsula I'm on contacted me, a Coast Guard person who was thrown out on for similar reasons. Because he blew the whistle. No, he was not a whistleblower. He was a member and his wife was a member, and they were seeing things that didn't belong in the gyms and in the locker rooms. This is going on everywhere.
Okay, so just to try to make a connection, we don't know how solid this is, but since 2016, since the YMCA has changed its protocol around sex-based spaces, there have been numerous and possibly so many that we don't know the number, incidences of males violating female, not just spaces, but privacy and up to and including sexual assault since they changed that protocol. And, we don't know if they want to be responsible for that or if they're liable for that, if they've been keeping records on this or not.
Yeah, we don't know, but we're doing the research now, and to me, this is very similar to what Fair Play for Women, Women Are Human, did with their Target study. And I don't know if everyone is aware of the Target study that was done by Women Are Human, which looked at Target stores from I think it was 2003 to 2017, when Target changed their bathroom policy from being a sex-based bathroom policy to a quote-unquote gender-neutral bathroom policy, and incidences of harassment and peeping Tom increased by 190%. So we're trying to do a similar thing with finding out how the change in policy since 2016 has impacted the privacy and rights of women and girls based on our sex. So this information will, I think, regardless of it, whether it pressures specifically, hopefully it will pressure the YMCA to change their policy. But regardless of that, this information will shine a brighter light on the entire question of whether or not women and girls deserve sex-based rights around our bodies, and whether or not policies that are basically protecting people's self-declarations about their identity have direct negative impact on women and girls safeguarding.
Particularly on women.
Particularly, exactly. Exactly.
I know that in Canada, they passed a law several years ago called C-16, and that was to enshrine gender identity into law and make that a non-discrimination category. And since then, they have suppressed, so far as I know, up to a few years ago, they suppressed all data on the fallout of this. And common sense would tell us that if you allow men into women's spaces, incidences of women being unsafe, feeling unsafe, and actually being harmed will increase. That would be common sense. So that the law has enshrined now something that is counter to common sense, of course, causes us to have to do a bunch of data to prove what common sense would already lay out. But that's what you guys are in the process of doing with the why.
Yeah. And I think, we'll have a few more events in town just to continue to shine a light on this and to just sort of play with what exists here. And, I will keep my messaging. One of my points is to keep disrupting the narrative that the town is trying to tell about itself and about us. So they are trying to tell a narrative that we are some sort of anti-identity ideology group, whereas we are pro women and girls. So as much as I can do to disrupt their narrative of bullying, disrupt their narrative of us being a hate group, as much as I can shine a light on what we actually are about and what we are trying to say, that's one of my goals as well.
To speak to what you were saying about the common sense of this mixing it all up, the acronym YMCA means Young Men's Christian Association, and they're incorporated as a nonprofit and likely as faith-based. I don't know that for sure. So that they get lots and lots of tax breaks and income based on that original understanding of the YMCA, which indeed at the turn of the century was very, very important for Indigenous and transient workers to have shelter, for women to have a place to shelter, and to help women get jobs. It was just stunning, the work and effort they put in the 20th century. They have big buildings in cities with pools and residences and so on, but no more. They are now, I will say, a neo-capitalist type of organization. They have a focus on profits. They have a grand business plan that includes things called superwise. And superwise are very, very big constructions. It takes hundreds of thousands of people in population to support those wise, so that they are making grand profits as a nonprofit. It's quite a deal. And those MBA boys from Yale have figured this one out really well. They have a cachet of 100 years of reputation, and now they have a big cash puppy.
So is there something specific if people want to get involved? Do you guys have a website or a blog that you've set up, or like a centralized hub for information?
I do, although it is under construction, but you can still follow it for now. I have a letjulieswim.org website. If you go to the page right now, it will say welcome, good things coming, something like this. But this is where you can go to follow events. I am putting up all media that we have around this. I'll be keeping a blog ongoing, and eventually, Julie, one other thing that is happening, Julie is pursuing, we are pursuing different legal angles. Yeah, that's it. Let Julie swim. We are pursuing different legal angles, both personal defamation angles, as well as free speech, freedom of assembly angles. We're communicating with legal counsel from Wolf. We're communicating with legal counsel from Women's Declaration International. I'm not sure where all we are going with that right now, but eventually the website will also be a place where people can contribute to a legal battle.
And Julie, can I ask you something that's a little orthogonal or just a little different than what we've been talking about? Like, what have you done? What's your skill? What do you produce? What's your hobby or your what has your life been about beyond just swimming at a Y and yelling at penised men?
You know, that's pretty interesting for you to bring that up. This incident has caused me to do a fairly large review of who am I in terms of being an activist. How did I step in this steaming puddle? I had no intention. And yet, as I look back, it turns out, like so many of us in the early 60s, I was on the street with signs over Vietnam. I was sitting in a classroom at the first assassination. I went through all the assassinations and came out, like so many others, very much more cynical and suspicious. And that continued on through the years with my young children. I became rather expert at being an organic gardener before organic was quite a word for many people. And then I moved up here with my family about 40 years ago. And it turns out in my review, I have been very active, effectively active in many city and county around issues, often with the environment, as being on the board of the Olympic Environmental Council. We were involved in very complex negotiations and court battles over the comprehensive planning which goes on in this state. And park plans. so many pieces that have actually been major chunks of political action. And it turns out I've spent a lot of time at the center of that, writing policy and supporting port actions and so on and so forth.
So you've been involved in the infrastructure of Washington State and the environment of this beautiful country. You've sunk your time and your soul into this.
I have.
Your state, yeah.
I have. I forgot to say, and I also registered voters during the whole SNCC years of trying to get civil rights things passed through. So this was a prelude. Here we are at civil rights again. Oh, I can't believe here we are at women. We're not quite being burned at the stake, but it's looking pretty miserable at this point after all these hundreds of years of efforts on the part of women. And we're right back at it again, trying to prevent, at this point, being erased from any public legislation.
I met Julie about 10 years ago, and that is what most impressed me about her when we met, because I don't think I had met anyone who was as much of a concerned citizen in their own town as Julie. I don't think I've met anyone who has written more letters to the paper or attended more city council meetings. And when I met Julie, she just immediately impressed me. As someone who was constantly concerned with keeping the city both fiscally and environmentally responsible. And I do think that, like your back, I don't know, I think you're saying that too, Julie, but your background in that participation, in a way really prepared you to be activated on this issue as well.
So unexpected, but what an interesting review in my old retiring years here. Oh my goodness, I did partake of some things. Yes, along the way.
You're an American hero, sounds like.
What?
Or villain, I guess. So you're an American hero or a villain, depending on which side of the line. But that's where we are right now as Americans, right?
I don't know. I've been reluctant to bring this up. I don't know how far and wide this is going. But my great-grandfather is Jack London, and he set a pace in his writings, and that is part of this review as I look at it. Now, he was a staunch socialist for a while, but he didn't stick with it. He had all kinds of places he was ranging in his adventures and in his polemics. But I sometimes sense that there may be something in the genetic makeup somewhere. I don't know. I don't know where all this came from, but now I sit with this review, and it's very satisfying in many ways. And thank you, Amy, for noticing.
Well, thank you both for allowing me to hear the firsthand accounts of this. I'm going to try to assemble as much of the footage as possible so people can see just how ridiculous things got, especially on the 15th, because just the worm man, it was just ridiculous. You see this grown man trying to snake through the legs of women.
Well, and the tattooed thug, they were agent provocateurs. Don't for a minute, don't think that that's not what was going on. They were looking to try and get fights going. It was really criminal what was going on.
Well, I want you guys to keep safe, but also keep standing up. And thank you so much for doing this. And I'll send people links to where they can contact and follow up on this story and help out if they feel so moved. So
Perfect. Thank you, Benjamin.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.